Welcome to Boots on the Ground with Fishers and Farmers. I'm Nancy North, Fishers and Farmers Communications and Outreach Lead and your host today, here with co-hosts Amy Smith and Heidi Coiler. Today, our featured guests are with Minnesota's 7 Mile Creek Watershed Partnership. Our Boots on the Ground series is a program of Fishers and Farmers Partnership for the Upper Mississippi River Basin, a national fish habitat partnership that's focused on respectfully connecting farmers, landowners, scientists, and all collaborators to listen and work together for resilient farms, streams, and fish. We cultivate a network of learning and exchange, produce a radio program, host workshops, and provide annual grants to local farmer-driven initiatives. Our agenda today begins with a short video about 7 Mile Creek and its fish. Then we move to an interview with our 5 featured guests. After that, we'll break into 10-minute small group conversations and then share short takeaways afterward. Our final half hour is an open Q&A where you can ask our guests questions directly. It's all really relaxed, and we've designed it to give you time to listen and absorb and think about how work in 7 Mile Creek Watershed might help you with your next wise steps. During the quiet months of the pandemic, 7 Mile Creek Watershed Partnership developed some videos, a series, featuring the watershed, the work they're doing, and the stream. And today we get to premiere one of those videos, one that's focused on the creek and fishing. You won't see the whole landscape in the film, so I wanted to share a few facts before we start the video. 7 Mile Creek drains 37 square miles of land south of St. Peter, Minnesota, north of Mankato in Nicollet County. The stream itself is just over 6 miles long, and it originates in a series of public drainage ditches in an area that was largely wetland before tile drainage made it possible to cultivate. 86% of the land is cultivated, and about 6% is forest, mostly bordering the creek. And just above the confluence with the Minnesota River, 7 Mile Creek flows down from the open plains into a popular county park where people like to hike, fish, and picnic. And I can't go on without saying I lived near this park for a long, long time, and it was the place where I took my kids to be out in the woods when they were little. So I appreciate all this work and find it very exciting. Amy, you can run the video.
I'm Scott Mockington, the Area Fisheries Supervisor with the Hutchinson Fisheries Office with the Department of Natural Resources. One of the really unique features in the 7 counties that the Hutchinson area manages is 7 Mile Creek in Nicollet County. It's one of the few tributaries to the Minnesota River that is a designated trout stream. Today was a big day because tomorrow is Saturday's trout fishing opener. Now, in certain counties in Minnesota, you can fish throughout the year, but really only after that mid-April opening day is when you're allowed to actually harvest fish. So if you catch them, you can keep them. We refer to 7 Mile Creek as a put and take fishery. We come out here because we have this wonderful cold water aquatic resource. We can put the fish in as adults, the sizes that anglers like to catch and harvest them, and they're available. Folks get to come out, buy your trout stamp, and go fishing out here. So we put 300 adult brown trout in here. They're about a pound a piece, but there's a lot of variation in sizes, so there are some big fish available as well. The big draw at 7 Mile Creek is brown trout, and while we know that a lot of them get harvested early in the trout season, we do know that they persist. We do annual surveys on this resource. We do see some fish that survive through, become larger, show up quite a bit bigger than their other cohorts. And so there are always a few fish that carry over, and we also know that these fish can survive through the summer, just because we will come through in September to do our electrofishing survey, and we'll see some fish then. Outside of the brown trout, really other opportunities are going to be somewhat limited. We have a lot of non-game fish species here. We've got some dace, some stone rollers, some darters, we've got some shiners. We see a mix, but I believe at last count we had something like 15 or so different fish species, so there's a little bit diversity here, not as much as in the Minnesota River, but the difference is the Minnesota River is a large order stream, a warm water system. This is just a small cold water stream that's really well situated to those brown trout. We stock 7 Mile Creek every single year to provide a fishing opportunity, but the biggest thing folks need to know why it's in this sort of put and take fishery that I talked about earlier is really our challenge here is base flow. In other words, when we think about how a stream functions, we want water coming out of the ground to feed this stream and kind of keep a perpetual stage, a certain height of river that we're always going to see that's going to ensure those fish to always have constant movement, new food coming in, enough water for them to survive. What we see at 7 Mile and other streams that are similar are variations in this base flow. If we get a huge rain event, it's going to flush through here very quickly. And then at other times of the year, where maybe in midsummer when we don't see as much, or into the fall when it tends to be drier times of year, we see it get critically low. And then when it's too shallow, then the temperatures do creep up. They get very warm and they can enter those really stressful or even lethal ranges for our trout. So probably base flow is our biggest challenge that we deal with here, and like a lot of streams in southern Minnesota, that is a challenge. Inside 7 Mile Creek, here in the county park and in the designated stretches, in other words, the portion of 7 Mile Creek that's in trout stream designation, the habitat's actually pretty good, and that's largely thanks to some folks that have stepped forward to do work. The Minnesota Department of Natural Resources did some habitat work here in the early 2000s, late 90s, and then most recently Trout Unlimited through the Lessard Sam's Outdoor Heritage Council. How we treat our watershed is ultimately how we treat our streams themselves. If we want to have healthy, vibrant waters, we need to take good care of the landscape that's around them. And you know, I definitely credit a lot of folks in this watershed for working with groups like Great River Greening, with our Soil and Water Conservation District at the county level, with producers, with nonprofits, with government agencies, with local government, whatever it might be. It's no secret that there's been a lot of work by nonprofits, government, and academics in this watershed, but it's an important place for that reason. We know it's kind of a gem, and we want to take good care of it, and I know the producers want to do the same. They have a vested interest in taking good care of the land, making sure they're able to pass it on to their next of kin, and the same is true of our water and of our stream here.
Okay. We are so lucky to have 5 people from this watershed project with us today, all with different roles and very different stories, and they found a way to work together and step into various kinds of leadership roles. So thank you all, even before I introduce you, for taking time for this. First, we'll start with Nick Peters. Nick operates a 5th generation farm, the Peters family farm, with his dad, Chuck. They run about 3,300 acres of land, mostly flat, black soil. They have a 900 sow farrow to finish hog operation that keeps 6 full-time employees and a couple of neighbors who contract grow, busy all year. They're really proud to combine profitability on the farm with conservation. So welcome, Nick. Thanks for joining us. Melissa Wilson.
Thanks for having me.
Melissa Wilson is a University of Minnesota Extension research professor specializing in manure management. Melissa's doing research now focused on timing and application of liquid manure into standing cover crops in 7 Mile Creek watershed. And she's working with farmer Dan Kaufman in the watershed. Welcome, Melissa.
Hi, everyone.
Ben Penner lives in St. Peter and farms near Belle Plaine. And he specializes in establishing alternate grain and crops and markets in the area. Ben's a member of the Kernza cooperative and sells his grain in southern Minnesota and the Twin Cities. Great River Greening also contracts Ben to systematically and responsively work with area farmers to integrate sustainable crops in their operations. So welcome, Ben.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Eric Miller is owner and manager of Southview Stock Farm, and he's worked with Nicollet County NRCS since 2015 as a watershed technician. He works with landowners to understand and implement individual conservation goals. And he's also a strategic and organizing member of the 7 Mile Creek Watershed Partnership. Welcome, Eric. And Brad Gordon, finally, is Southern Minnesota Program Manager at Great River Greening, an NGO, and he coordinates the partnership. Welcome, Brad.
Great, thank you.
This group has a wide variety of work going now, and they also have a long history. So before we launch in, just to all of you participants who are listening right now, here's what I'd like you to think about as you listen. And this will relate to the discussions and our future, the dialogue later too. As we build work across watersheds, shared work, what happens when the low-hanging fruit is plucked? When first practices are implemented, when the first surge of interest is past, or the first influx of big money is gone, used up. How did 7 Mile Creek Partnership evolve itself, and how might it inform you? So listen for ways they've adapted over time. Okay, Nick, I want to start with you because you and your dad recently received a really cool award. And you've been working a long time to get practices on your land that make a difference for soil and water. The award that Nick received is the Water Storage Trailblazer Award from the Water Resources Center at Minnesota State University, Mankato. It's an award that recognizes what landowners and farm operators have done to keep water on the land and reduce flashy stream flows. So congratulations, Nick. It's a big honor, and it's a large region that they've reached across to recognize you. Will you start our conversation by telling about the practices you've implemented on your farm? Just tell your story a little bit.
Sure. Well, we started strip tilling back in 2011 was our first year. And back then we got into it mostly for economic reasons. We thought we were pretty interested in doing 3 passes in one and trying to ban fertilizer, and thought we could, save a lot of costs doing that. Back then soil health wasn't a huge topic, and so we got into it more for the efficiency reasons. Later on we learned more that now the big talk is soil health and carbon and all that. But so yeah, since we've been doing strip till for almost 10 years, and then probably the last 5 years we've gotten into cover crop with some grants and help from Equip and 7 Mile Creek. We've been learning quite a bit about that and tried quite a few acres on that. Probably almost a third of our acres last year were in cover crop at the end of the year. Also been getting into some diversifying our rotations too. So we work with a local dairy with planting alfalfa. So about 5% of our acres are in alfalfa now, and probably another 10% of our acres every year are in small grain. Just trying to break up pest cycles and build soil health that way too. And then we did do a drainage water management project in 2015, then a bioreactor at that same time. So just trying to hold water back in the field with water gates and And then any water that does get past the water gates has to go through a biofilter and hopefully get scrubbed and cleaned, and is totally clean by the time it leaves that bioreactor. So.
Thanks. It's an assortment of things to manage and watch. I'm wondering, are you satisfied with how the practices are working, or do the ideas keep churning, and do you keep thinking of ways you want to do things differently as time goes on?
Yeah, we've been very happy with the strip till system. We think that saves us money every year, reduces cost, and especially in these wet springs that we've had. This year wasn't a wet spring, but the last 5 years have been wet springs, and I think that's quite an advantage to have a good firm soil to work with and not be compacting the soil. And I think we handle water a lot better than we would if we were aggressively doing tillage. On the cover crops, we're still learning quite a bit on them. I'm not an expert on that by any means yet, but I've learned quite a bit on that and pretty happy with how that's going. I haven't had any major problems with it.
Okay, thank you. I understand you've also been active in the 7 Mile Creek Watershed Partnership from the start. Will you say something about why that's been important to you and why you've made time for it?
Yeah, like you said, that 7 Mile Creek is about a 6-mile stream or so, and it pretty much originates in the heart of our farmland. So we have a pretty big vested interest in that creek. And the 7 Mile Creek Partnership has helped us with some grants in the past to get started on some of these projects. The strip till and cover crop, they've been a big help with that. So we decided, well, that's the least we can do is to be on the board and help promote some of this in the future years. So that's how we got on.
Yeah, thank you. Eric, could you speak for a minute to the issues in the watershed and the surrounding area that make all this necessary?
So, I mean, yeah, you kind of touched on it. 7 Mile Creek is a predominantly ag watershed. And like you said there at the beginning, most of the natural wetlands and any of the natural drainage that was there, has been replaced with county ditches and county tile mains. And so I guess to throw in a little bit of history on top of it, back in the mid 90s, when all this started, they realized, there were big issues, starting with the runoff and the increased erosion and the nutrients, and so wanted to figure out a way to kind of start figuring out why that was happening. With the increased rainfall we've had, for as flat as the main watershed is, it's still got to go somewhere. And with as flashy, when we have those big rainfall events, we're basically seeing flash floods down through the ravine system that I believe it was U of M, with some monitoring and some modeling, came up with like 60% of the sediment runoff that's coming to the mouth of the creek is actually coming from the ravine system because of those saturated soils and the high water flows coming through the system. And so that's what we've been trying to address is how do we keep more water on the landscape up top, to try to slow down that flow and spread out the curve a little bit longer.
Mm-hmm. How does that relate to what was said in the video about the water levels in the stream and the irregularity of that?
So with the tile drainage, there can be a constant flow, but trying to think of the right way to say it. because of the increased production and, those wetlands and the natural drainage that's been removed, we get flashier events. Water comes off the landscape a lot faster. And that is, that's what leads to, you might have, a short-term high flow through the park, and then it'll drop right back down to, 2 foot of flow at the monitoring stations. I don't know if I really answered your question.
Yeah, you did. So the practices that Nick talked about, the cover crops, the bioreactors and so forth, are they holding the water on the land? Are they accomplishing that or helping to get there?
Yes. So the practices that, Nick and the other farmers we've worked with are, we're, and I don't have the exact numbers from the monitoring data, but we are seeing, some benefits from the cover crops, from the no-till, strip-till, and the drainage water management. The other big thing that we've targeted has been edge of ravine or edge of field, just small structures, water and sediment control basins, just things that they slow it down coming off the field and kind of meter it out a little bit more. And with all of those combined, we are, I think, seeing a difference in the flows and in the nutrients that are being carried down.
Okay. A lot of work's been done, as you said, over the last 100 years or so in this watershed. And particularly in the last 10, you gained a lot of momentum. I'll open this up to all of you. Over the last 10 years, what kinds of activities have driven that momentum? Maybe you want to start, Eric, and others of you can chime in.
Yeah, in the last 10 years, really since kind of the partnership with Great River Greening began, we've had various 319 grants, Clean Water Fund grants, and most recently a targeted watershed demonstration project, a Clean Water Fund. It was one of the types of Clean Water Fund grants. I kind of break it down as, I guess, going backwards. Targeted watershed is where we were looking at the non-structural practices. That through the targeted watershed grant, we were able to offer incentive payments for cover crops, no-till, strip-till, the drainage water management, and the bioreactors. We had, with Nick and Chuck, and then a couple other producers, we had a lot of interest in cover crops. Everybody that tried it through the targeted watershed grant has stuck with it so far. Strip till kind of the same way. It's once they started doing it, they've stuck with it. The drainage water management, we were able to get that on about 220, 230 acres. Definitely seeing an improvement, in off of those fields, and the bioreactors. Bioreactors have had mixed results, in my opinion, just because of placement and kind of how everything was designed. But that's a story for another day. And then prior to that, we had the Clean Water Fund 13 grant that primarily focused on those structural projects that I talked about. I haven't totaled it up completely, but my best estimate is we have somewhere around 80 to 90% of the ravine heads and the little fingers along the system. We've got some sort of structure there to help prevent, just that direct flow of water over the edge of the ravine. And also with that, we also focused on the alternative side inlet structures along the ditches to help slow down some of that water running directly off the fields.
I heard you use the word focus a lot.
What was that?
I heard you use the word focus a lot. It sounds like there were some real decisions made about how to proceed and how to bring people into conversation and get the work done.
Some of it is just the nature of the grant. You know, the grant application process. You kind of have to spell that out, you know, at the beginning, and that laid out, you know, that we had, and with the, you know, like the Clean Water 13 money, I wasn't around for that. Actually, I wasn't around for the grant writing process of either of them. But that was, you know, the discussions were had internally, you know, what they wanted to focus on. And so, you know, with the grants, there's some flexibility, but you're kind of limited to, you know, to what was originally laid out in the work plan. That's just the nature of the beast. But with targeted watershed, especially, because there was a little more flexibility, we could take some input from the team, the core team that we had, Nick, a couple other farmers, and some agency folks that were on that core team. You know, some of our work, we had the flexibility to kind of work with their recommendations and the directions that they wanted to go. So that's.
Other thoughts? Anyone else?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned momentum starting, you know, just under 10 years ago, really picking up. And I think you just have to look at the core team members, and a lot of this work happens. It's when you have people who kind of stick with it and keep those conversations going. And I mean, a big part of it was so having money available to offer. So getting that interest, and then making sure that there was, you know, some sort of incentive if it helped the operation, or if there was some sort of financial reimbursement behind it. So I think, yeah, a lot of credit goes to a lot of the partners who were really working hard and came together around that time, about just under 10 years ago.
Brad, this group comes at, I mean, as I said earlier, there's a lot going on right now. What are the challenges of seeing what's needed? And Ben, I know you've been, and Nick, you've been with us a long time in the watershed. What are the challenges seeing what's needed? Making strategic decisions, putting activities in motion. For example, how did manure management and the alternate crops, Kernza, how did those rise up as your priorities right now? I guess I'm looking at the people side of,
Yeah.
you know, how do you figure out what you're going to focus on? What's worth focusing?
Right, yeah. And I mean, I came onto the team, started working at Graver Greening in 2019. And so at that time, there was a lot of transition happening in the watershed, a lot of turnover, and a lot of, you know, staff changes and everything, and funding for on-the-ground implementation kind of wrapping up. And so there was that kind of pause and reflection, trying to figure out, okay, where do we go next, and who's interested, and who's done the practices so far. So I think on the screen right now, we have a great representation, you know, of you know, Eric was around and Nick was around during the start of that momentum, and they kind of know how those practices when it got started. And then sitting back and reflecting, we're trying to through, okay, what's next? What is everyone interested in? And that's where I think kind of Melissa and Ben kind of represent that kind of thinking outside the box and trying to figure out where the momentum is going to be next and where the interests are next. And so thinking about, okay, if we have some farmers who are already doing some of these practices like cover crops and strip tillage, then how do we keep improving that to make sure we're actually getting the best water quality out of that practice as possible, and adjusting to, changing climate, more precipitation, or a year like this where it's actually decent levels or maybe not enough. And then also trying to think too of like, what do we mean by sustainability in the watershed? So how is it actually helpful economically and agronomically, and then environmentally, so water quality and everything. So I think that's where Ben really comes in. We're talking about some new crops, and we're seeing some of these perennial and some of these cover crops that actually can be harvested, and really trying to look at markets and how market can drive some of these practices. When we don't have necessarily the funding to implement some of those practices, there are some other ways, some other economic incentives that we can get into that really can drive some of these practices that are great for water quality as well. So that's kind of the connection. Like, who's on the screen right now? It's kind of covering the kind of the history of what's happening in the watershed and kind of where we're going now.
Yeah, that's a great question, Nancy, and thanks, Brad. That's a great overview. I'm just thrilled to be here. I think the work that we're doing here is really some of the most important work that can be done, and just thrilled that we have such a forward-looking group here in my local area. I'm kind of a newcomer. I only moved to the area about 12 years ago, and but I grew up on a wheat farm, and I'm a farm nerd, a wheat farm in central Kansas. So that interest sort of drove me to like the way you say it, Brad, thinking outside of the box for sure. And I think, when I started, I'll just give a quick overview and then kind of, go into, a little bit where we are. But when I started my farm, which is located in several different places, in about 3 counties. I live in Nicollet County in St. Peter. What I saw was really an opportunity to look at I saw a market niche for small grains and especially heritage grain crops in the marketplace. And I have a personal history with that, with some heritage crops, specifically turkey red, winter wheat, which my family grew in central Kansas in the late 19th and mid 20th centuries. But there's some interest in small grains in general. And so I think one of the changes that we've seen is definitely more of an interest, or maybe kind of coming back of an interest. I know Nick just mentioned, he's got a pretty significant portion of its acres in small grains. Looking for ways to develop new markets that can profitably support the whole farm perspective. And I think there's a number of innovative farmers in our area, in the Rogers Creek watershed and the 7 Mile, that are doing that very, very well and implementing it as a part of their rotation. With Kernza, so I'm working with a group of farmers in Rogers Creek, and with Kernza, we currently have three fields that are in their either first or second year of production, and it sort of dovetails with all of the different needs of society at large, and really of a number of the farms and farmers in the area. In that, we need to find ways to mitigate runoff. We need to find ways to put more carbon in the soil, and the long roots, the 8 or 9 or however deep roots that they go, really does that well. Plus, there's a significant interest in the marketplace to bring forward a new crop that has all of those handles that the end user can know about, can learn about, and really participate in helping to promote both the equitable and sustainable farming and agriculture, as well as their the society at large. So there's just a number of different places where I think these types of crops, especially the Forever Green Initiative crops, can come in. So I'm working on I think the question was what do you need, and I like, we need markets and supply chains. I have been in meetings with farmers, and I truly believe we can grow what we need to grow as long as there's a market and a supply chain developed alongside that. So that's really a key focus of what I'm working on, kind of on an individual level with my own farm, trying to pioneer that with about 25 different stores using my products, bakeries, farm to school programs, etc. And looking at how can we scale that, because right now, it's at a pretty small scale. How can we scale that? And I think we can, into the larger companies and really get those products locally made that are environmentally beneficial onto the store shelves, and bring that value back to the farmers, back to the landscape, back to the communities, and create that virtuous cycle. So there's just kind of a range of systems that are involved in that. I'm on the steering committee of a group called the Perennial Promise Growers Cooperative, and we represent right now approximately 50 farmers, not all locally, but around the state of Minnesota, some in Wisconsin, and elsewhere, trying to do exactly that work, specifically for Kernza, with an eye toward winter camelina and bringing that into the rotation, especially into a sort of a soybean rotation, and providing knowledge and assistance and finding ways to drive those markets forward for farmers.
Thanks a lot, Ben. And I'm sure that the group will have questions for you later. Melissa, I want to give you some time to talk about what you're doing with manure management and why that's important in 7 Mile Creek and Rogers watersheds.
Thanks. It's really great to hear all of the progressive stuff that's happening in 7 Mile Creek. So it's great to be included and involved in this. So thank you for the invite. I am basically doing research to try to figure out what are opportunities for applying manure to optimize nutrient management while reducing how much nutrients are lost. And typically manure in Minnesota is applied in the fall, and that's a fine practice, assuming you can get it on when the soil temperatures are pretty cool, which is usually later fall. And with, I think Brad talked about it earlier, with changing climate, we've been seeing wetter conditions. So it's been really hard to get manure applied in good conditions that we know that we're going to minimize nutrient losses. So some of my work and what I've heard from around the state is, people want to know how can they apply manure to a living crop, whether it's cover crops. And I know there's some interest possibly even to learning how to apply it into some of these perennials too. How can we do that without, completely destroying the crop? So I'm kind of starting with some on-farm research. Small, we're going with cover crops. That way, if we completely destroy it, that's fine, because there's a cash crop following it after, with the hopes that we can potentially upscale this to maybe go into some perennials in the future. But oddly enough, I actually sent out a tweet on Twitter and said a couple of years ago, like, hey, there's this cool NRCS Conservation Innovation Grant at the NRCS USDA. I was like, anyone interested that'd like to do some on-farm trials? And Dan Kaufman from the 7 Mile Creek Watershed actually was like, yeah, I'm in. So we wrote a grant and are using strip till manure application into cover crops and trying to see just how that works out. In fact, this past spring, what we did is he killed some of the cover crops right at planting, and then we left some late to kind of do the plant into the green. And we're just seeing how that is affecting the corn crop after. I have to say, in this particular year where we had a warm spring, the cover crops that stayed for a lot longer really sucked up a lot of moisture, and that corn isn't looking very good. But these are the kinds of things that you have to test out in order to be able to know if it's a viable practice or not. So that's kind of my role. It's not as grand as what you are all doing, but trying to do my little piece.
Thank you. And it's time for us to move to the small groups. I have so many more questions, and I'm sure everybody does. But right now we're going to move into the small groups.
Yeah, I'm Brian Schultz. I'm the Assistant Regional Fisheries Manager for the Southern region out of New Ulm. And I was involved with 7 Mile originally when it started. Not as much, obviously, as Jack Lauer was, but, worked with Craig and others when they were putting together the stream habitat portion of it, where they were making some changes within the stream.
I'm Carolyn Batts, and I live in Madison, Wisconsin. I worked for the Department of Natural Resources for almost 25 years, and then worked at UW-Madison for 11 years. And when I worked at the Department of Natural Resources, I was in the Priority Watershed program, so it was very similar to what is happening in 7 Mile Creek, but the program kind of sunsetted after about 25 years or something like that. But we worked on lots and lots of watersheds throughout the state, and just doing the same kinds of practices, and having the Citizen Advisory Committee and so on. Right now I work on a grant with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. I've retired from UW-Madison, and I interview farmers about their farm management practices, and also about community and personal health.
Ryan?
Hey everybody, I'm Ryan Toot. I'm a watershed forestry specialist with the U.S. Forest Service. I'm in state and private forestry. And I serve our Midwest states in watershed-oriented partnerships where forestry can play a role. And Fishers and Farmers is one of those partnerships, although forestry isn't as much represented as some of the conservation practices, some of the other conservation practices that are used. It's certainly an important part of it.
Great, thanks. Hey, Ben, is it okay with you if I skip you, since we already heard a little bit about you? And I'm just looking at this timer, like clicking down. Or do you have anything else you want to say about you?
Nope, go ahead.
Okay. Cool, thanks. So I believe the question is, how did the 7 Mile Creek Partnership evolve? Or maybe how do any of these watershed organizations evolve? Carolyn, if you bring any wisdom from other places you've worked, perhaps. And when things need to change, what happens? Anyone want to start with that?
I worked on a project I have my specialty is in lakes, not streams, but it's all the same kind of thing of something downstream. And one of the projects I worked on for about 11 years, I think that people, we have this lake right here in Madison is very large, and it eventually evolved to the point where a new private organization was formed by farmers and local citizens, and their job is to do fundraising. And so the government has kind of gotten out of it at this point, and this private organization is raising money, and they do things like fund cover crop seeds for farmers in the area. So it wasn't an easy thing, because people like me felt like we were getting pushed out. But and guess what? The lakes are just as bad as they were. Which is really awful.
I I could say a little bit about 7 Mile Partnership since I've been involved in, again, for 7 or so years. When I first started, there were a couple of very active farmers who were coming to these meetings that were organized primarily by Great River Greening and some agency folks, and we were meeting pretty solidly for a couple of years, and I've had some pretty good flow. And then there was some personnel turnover, and also some grants, some grants ending and other things beginning, but maybe with slightly different missions or slightly different focus. From my perspective, really the personnel turnover was a big disruption. Because we were a small group. I mean, it's a small watershed. And so it was a small group. And so you lose a couple of your movers and shakers, and suddenly it's like, okay, who's going to take over that role now? And not that the other people aren't movers and shakers, but just, someone who had been a leader, had taken on that work, and then they leave, and then what happens?
You're right, Lori. You do need good leadership, and you have to have people that are motivated to make a difference, and you need education so that people understand that all the different practices and things that can go on help something, or to help within a watershed. And if I remember right, with the 7 Mile, there was some issues with the ravines that were taking out property at a fairly alarming rate. And so it was easy to show people that, do you want to keep losing property, or do you want to take some of that property out and do some practices that will keep the rest of your property from being eroded away. And so it helps to have some actual evidence of things happening. And you need, like I said, you need motivated people, and you need people with good leadership, a good leadership background to push all this forward.
Yep, and I can speak a little bit more broadly as well, just because I'm not as intimately familiar with 7 Mile as other folks on the call are. But I think, having sort of contextual awareness of broader attitudes and economic drivers, I think is important, right? With the consideration of Kernza and trying to build markets around that, knowing when the time is right to begin doing that, seeing those opportunities and working on them before the opportunity is passed or before it's too late. I think just having that, I guess maybe it's political, but more broad than that, economic awareness, I think is really important and valuable. Climate change, for instance, right? Climate change has been on folks' minds for a long time, but I think in the last year or so has certainly been elevated in the political discussion.
You bring up a good point, Ryan, about making it, when you talk about economics, I think economics does drive a lot of what management practices we're going to do, especially with cover crops. And if you can make these things economically viable for people to do, and then add on the soil health and everything else that you get with doing using some of these practices, then it makes it, I think, much easier to get more people involved.
All right, Nancy, it looks like everybody is kind of back or working their way back. So let us start with the first group. Laura, Triplet, you want to give us a little synopsis of what you guys chatted about?
Sure. Let's see. I was giving a little bit, I think, of our group. I was the one with maybe the longest experience in the partnership. And so I mentioned that some things that were a pretty small watershed, a pretty small group of people, we had some personnel turnover and then some grants coming and going and things changing in terms of funding. And those two things seemed, from my perspective, to be, obstacles or a little bit disruptive to how our group was really functioning in the beginning. And we talked about the need for someone with skills in leadership. And the willingness to take on that kind of role, someone excited about that aspect, the need for awareness of economic context and markets and funding opportunities, the need to be aware of the timing of opportunities and to not let opportunities slip away, and also a mention of, like, in contrast, Carolyn mentioned another organization in Wisconsin that sounded much bigger and kind of became its own private organization. And so maybe some things to be learned from kind of comparison contrast with how other partnerships have changed through time.
Very good. Thank you. The second group, Deanna was supposed to be the group leader, but she had to leave before. So Marie, Brad, Dan, Kelly, that's your guys' group.
Yeah. Okay. I could take the opportunity too to thank Deanna. She had to hop off. She is our student intern who made the video that we watched earlier. So cool. If you want to see more of the videos, we just put them up on the 7-milecreek.org website. So I missed my opportunity to thank her when she was still on the call, but yeah, and Laura is one of her faculty there at Gustavus. So we appreciated that internship. From our group though, unfortunately, Dan was cut off. He was about to share, but Marie shared some really great stuff from Wisconsin. And I think the biggest highlight from what she was sharing is noticing in the watersheds where she's working, where farmers and managers and everything seem to be evolving and adapting really well. It's like she really notices a lot of competitiveness among the farmers. And so I think like the big thing that that would be like great to take away is just like the fun component. Like they have fun competing, they have fun growing what they're growing and figuring out, how to embrace that fun aspect. So that was really cool to hear.
Very good. Thank you. Jack, your group was up next.
Hi, Jack Lauer. So our group, a little bit of mix, some actually new to this call today, but what I heard was changes in how the way the producers are able to do their work, the manure application. Now we're talking about, alfalfa farming is maybe different, not just corn and beans. So it was really about learning from each other. And what was key, what I've noticed key in this entire partnership the last 20 years was being able to have someone at the helm pull it together. We've been able to have different watershed coordinators, which is huge. We've had academia working on projects at U of M, people saying I'm in, and the key is to try to meet at least once a year. Bring in the farmers, bring in the, I'll say experts, bring in people that are just curious. But as we're on this call today, that is the theme, that was the evolution that's kept 7 Mile somewhat having the spotlight on them. Some interest in a collaborative regional work at the watershed level. So what we've learned in 7 Mile, share your information, showcase it in other places. I see Wisconsin and Iowa's on the call today. Similar issues, different landscape, but share the what you learned from those groups. Having a website that's active, existing, get it out there, make it fresh. And I couldn't stress enough trying to find funding to maintain that watershed coordinator. We heard from Eric. Eric's got enough to do in the entire Nicollet County. And when he has to focus his time, or Kevin or Blake, on paperwork, programs with NRCS and the farmers, it's a lot to do. So having a watershed coordinator now that Brad has picked up is huge. So I wish all of you guys well, and that we stay together and meet more often. That's number 3.
Thank you, Jack. Jim, your group is up next. You still on, Jim? Is anybody in Jim Stein's group that wants to?
Here, I got it. I've muted myself. Here I am. So we had a good group, and I kind of feel like an outlier here because I'm an Iowan along Mississippi River, but we catch everything you guys send down here, so we want to keep it clean. And I also happen to have our family has property up in Vilas County, Wisconsin, so that's an important area to me too. But anyway, we talked about keys to keeping the group together, and someone mentioned that it starts with finding a good leader who is kind of charismatic, that will keep things alive and going. And you kind of, and in all these groups, this isn't just this, but almost every group you get into, you've got to find somebody with the passion that you can put in charge and they want to be in charge. And to me, that's a huge deal, because it's so easy for people to start out with good intentions, but you kind of lose energy or something, and you need somebody with that boom to keep people cranked up. The other thing we talked about is if you're going to do much of anything, funding is such a priority, whether it be, a state, county, just a group of local people. But funding is so important to about anything you want to try and do, that it's definitely, I've always looked at it when you're trying to get something done in town or anywhere. One of the first things you look for to have on your committee is somebody that's good at fundraising, and has a big phone book that can help you out. The other thing is, it's important that people, whoever you get to be your leader, is someone that's super friendly, that it's easy for people to talk to them, and that they need to be a good facilitator. They have to have enough. Money is important in a lot of these things, and you need to get enough mass of people to actually engage, or you got to find somebody that's really good at getting people to engage to get some of these things off the ground.
Good. Thank you, Jim. All right, Eric, you are the last one up.
I guess I might first kind of echo what Jack said. And this wasn't part of our group discussion, but it's a good point of having that leader, or having that person that can kind of take things and run with it. It would have been even more challenging just with the way the funding streams run. When our targeted watershed money ran out in 19, my work in 7 Mile until the 319 fund from Gustavus came, or the 319 grant that Laura got at Gustavus, my work in 7 Mile was shut off. Still found ways to keep up my contacts and, keep working on it. But with the way the funding stream sets, it's hard. If all of a sudden I've got to start billing hours to something else. And so that's probably where one of the biggest advantages that we have is that partnership with Great River Greening. We've had some great watershed coordinators in there. Karen Gallus was here when I started. Brad's here now. It's without them, and having, that person be able to focus on keeping things moving forward, it would be challenging. So thank you, Brad, for keeping me on the right track. So part of our group discussion there was, it's just kind of the reminder to break out of, I'm going to quote Scott here, reminder to break out of our silo and finding common areas for working together. It's so easy to, kind of get, you focus on the work you're doing and only the work you're doing, but it's helpful to step back and look at, well, how does my work tie into what, in this case, what Scott's doing, Scott's goals with the fishery work in 7 Mile, or, things like that. It's how can we tie all this together to keep the program moving forward. So.
Good. Thank you, Eric. That's all the groups, Nancy.
Hey, thanks, Amy. And thanks, everyone. I've been thinking all day about the incredible value of farmer-driven watershed groups, local watershed groups. They look different in every place, but I kept asking myself, listening to you, why are they so important? And every one of you mentioned the need for shared work, the need for connection, whether it's competition or teaching or mentoring or figuring out markets. All those things are social. And it seemed like as you all spoke, it was pretty much talking about connection, talking about leadership, and then the funding to support that, which seems to be the platter, what we need to make it all happen. So I thank you all for your wisdom there. We are ready for the Q&A and just opening this up so you all can ask this group whatever questions you like. We do this by just asking you to put your view on gallery view if you're not already there. And we just watch each other. We find people are very considerate. When there's an opening, feel free to ask your question and we'll just have a conversation.
Everyone can turn on their videos too. I mean, unmute yourself if there's not a horrible amount of background noise, and just an open conversation. I have no questions in the chat this time, which I think is the first time we haven't had a question in the chat. So whoever wants to go first, go for it.
Go
This
ahead.
is Jack Lauer. A question for maybe Nick and Ben. It's, farmers. You often see people knocking at your door for some initiative, or innovative practice, and probably overwhelmed with the visitors. But even today, you're seeing new faces. I guess as a farmer, how receptive is it to be able to work towards this collaborative effort of making improvements on the farm within mind of you're improving the stream? Is it difficult for farmers? And that's one. And are you able to connect with farmers in the township or in the entire watershed with the same types of practices? Is there some harmony there?
Yeah, in our township where we farm, there aren't a lot of people doing strip till and cover crops. So it is a little bit, I think a lot of people are interested in seeing what we're doing. So they have a lot of questions, I guess. It is, I think it does take some funding or some grants, something to help nudge them towards taking that leap towards doing some conservation practices. I think that is help.
Yeah, I can answer that question maybe two different ways. For me as a farmer, the practices make a whole lot of sense. Just from a from a market perspective of really trying to innovate and really launch a farm. So I think that having from the other side, being the person knocking on the door, I am also just an interested person, and I think that drives relationships, is being interested in what the real needs of the farmers that you're talking to are, and for me, there's a number of farmers also trying to launch, business at the same time. And so I think there's just a lot of natural collaboration that happens along those lines. But, getting the timing right is absolutely critical, down to the, half an hour when, that's not when the dryer, bin dryer needs to be turned on or off or whatever, or I think that kind of knowledge is critical when you're approaching someone. And just frankly, driving the truck, which is sometimes what I do.
You know, I guess I'll jump in a little bit on this. So that was kind of the other thing we talked about in our breakout was the financial side of it. And, you know, as Nick kind of alluded to, there's neighbors that are asking the questions, wanting to find out more, but that financial side it can be tricky. And so, you know, when you talk about kind of the future for 7 Mile Creek or the surrounding area, you know, we're looking to the north right now. The St. Peter drinking water supply management area, and then the Rogers Creek watershed is another large ag watershed in eastern Nicollet County. There's some crossover in producers, and the Rogers Creek watershed is a lot of where Ben is working. And so, you know, kind of our focus is somewhat shifting towards getting some of that financial incentive to encourage producers to start utilizing, you know, some of these practices in those watersheds. So, you know, that the last questions, they'll be, you know, other farmers will ask questions, they'll be curious, they'll want to know more. But with, you know, the ag climate being what it is now, it can get challenging when you're trying to justify making that leap into doing something different. So,
Nick, you mentioned in the very beginning of this program that you started using strip till, I believe, for financial reasons. You just thought it was smart. And this is something that comes up, a question that comes up in every conversation is, are these best management practices for nutrient runoff and soil health and streams, and are they profitable? Can they become profitable? What's your experience with that?
Yeah. Yep. I really think on the strip till being we're combining our fall tillage and our spring tillage and a fertilizer pass and banding fertilizer so we can lower our fertilizer rates. I think we are coming out ahead on the strip tillage, definitely. And then I think there's some soil health benefits too to reducing tillage. I think, but I talked about before, we manage water or large rain events probably better than we would if we were doing conventional tillage. So I'm definitely a proponent of strip tillage, and I think it makes financial sense. On cover crops, I'm still learning on that. I think there is a potential to reduce your herbicide costs with a good cover crop. I mean, we've seen that. I don't know if it necessarily reduces the amount of weeds, but it definitely suppresses them, and it makes them, it slows them, and easier to treat a field with cover crop. So I think you can reduce herbicide costs with a cover crop. You know, with cover crops, you're trying to build your soils and put carbon in the soil, and sometimes that can be, you know, it's tough to say on year one, well, how much money did that cover crop make me? That's for the scientists to tell me, I guess, probably, but I can say I have less herbicide costs when we plant cover crop. I'll say that.
When your neighbors take you aside and ask about these practices, is this something they ask about?
Oh, definitely. I mean, money drives everything. You know, it's got to make financial sense. So yeah, we talk about that. It is a big cost for strip tilling. It is a big cost to get into it. You know, if you're not owning your own machine, it's big capital cost to get in, and it's not the easiest way to farm either. It takes a high level of management to do it. It takes good. I always say whoever runs the corn planter is the same one that has to run the strip tiller. So you can put a strain on labor too. So it is kind of a big jump, but yeah.
Ben, could you speak to the profitability question related to perennial crops?
Yeah, I think, well, a couple of things to say about that. You know, I think anytime that you're introducing something brand new, really there's there is an efficiency a learning curve with anything. And I think finding ways that perennial crops can be, a part of that efficiency and actually maximize that management efficiency, that's going to drive the profitability of the entire operation, not just of one particular crop on one particular acre. And I think that's an important way to look at it, from a whole farm standpoint. We're as these markets develop, especially for crops like Kernza, finding that price point where it is profitable, because it's a significantly less amount of grain, for example, than corn or really any other crop. Really telling that story in such a way that that value drives the adoption. And so we're kind of in the midst of that, and it needs to compete with the current system. The current system is a well-functioning, well-oiled machine, and needs to we need to take that into consideration. So it has to at least meet or exceed, and at this early stage, in some ways, really exceed that.
I do have a question in the chat now. This question is for folks working in other states or watersheds. What have you found to be the most successful ways or reasons for bringing people together and bringing new people into a watershed partnership?
I could talk about that a little bit because I have a couple newish groups, the past few years that I've worked with. I think someone else mentioned this before, but like having that one farmer that is not just like innovative and willing to take some risk, but is also well respected in the community is really important. Where I've seen watershed groups not succeed is when everyone who started the group has already drank the Kool-Aid. Like that doesn't work, because then quote unquote, more conventional farms don't feel welcome if everyone else in the farm is already 100% grass-fed, grass-finished beef, duh, like that's not a welcoming group. So where we've had a lot of success with a newer group that's about 3 years old is that the farmer is, fifth, sixth generation farmer. He was dairy up until just last year, and they just switched to beef. He didn't go bankrupt or anything. They just moved on from dairy, but he invites people. I don't invite people to these watershed meetings. He invites people, and then other farmers in the group just kind of call up their buddies and say, hey, come over for a slice of pizza, and so is going to come talk. But it's really more of a social event. I'd say 70% of the meeting ends up being social, and then the other 30%, maybe we talk about this and that. But I did want to mention that I feel like community dynamics are so important in these groups that, again, I said I don't invite people because I don't understand the community dynamics. And I can't just invite anyone who has called my office and talked to me, because there might be something going on underneath the surface that I don't know about that is like, a family thing. And so I'm just really careful to let the farmers really lead who's coming to the meetings and the field days and things like that.
I think that's a really excellent point. I would add too that as community dynamics have changed, over generations, there also is a need for that community, so and I think that's something to really consider, is that as some of these ties have gone one way or the other over a generation, it's important to have that. So yeah, great point.
I would add too that in my contacts with farmer-driven watershed groups in all 5 states of the basin, I hear very often that there's a real social satisfaction and drive to be in the meetings, because there are fewer farms, there are fewer people living in most townships, and this is something that connects people. They just find friends. And it makes them really happy.
Yeah, that's where I think, just coming into the to the area in 2019, and then having COVID come in and shut things down while I was still learning all the dynamics. Yeah, it was really important to make sure I was not trying to insert myself too much, in trying to kind of promote or invite or whatever, So it's like relying on somebody like Ben locally, who kind of knows, he's friends with a number of the farmers in the area. So being able to have him kind of make those introductions and arrange gatherings, and yeah, I think it's really important. We are seeing like who those leaders are too, the ones that everyone else is kind of watching. If they're trying a new rotation, trying a new cover crop, or a lot of the other farmers are just waiting to see at least a year of that crop and then make comments, to Ben or something like, "Hey, did you see his field? It looks really good there." That was, yeah, I might want to try that after all. So yeah, it's a really important factor. So being at the nonprofit and everything, I just try to create that platform for those conversations to happen. And it's pretty, we're actually really excited because we're finally having our first field day next week, since, COVID and everything. So we're going to have all of the Kernza snacks and beverages, and trying to have all the different partners and buyers present, meeting with a lot of the farmers who are interested. And so yeah, one of those kinds of local gatherings where we can kind of have some fun a little bit, and really talk about how the grain is looking. And this year it is looking really good. Yeah. So we're excited to like finally be able to have those fun gatherings now again, and really trying to think about, I think Heidi mentioned the barbecues. I mean, we had one on the calendar last year. We were going to do it in the park because there's still farmers actually in the watershed who have never been in the park, which is just downstream. So yeah, it's stuff like that we're excited for, and we are excited now that it's finally coming around.
Say, if I could put in a plug for producer barbecues, we had a really great one at Will Crombie's farm with the Cannon Valley producers, and we sampled so much awesome food, had some wonderful conversation. And one of the main points I took away from that was that, farmers don't often have the time to get together because they're so busy. They really have the interest. And so when someone does organize a barbecue to come together, just, conversation, what's happening on their farm, and connect with each other is really appreciated. So I can't, Will and everyone said we can't wait to do another one next year.
Well, we're just a couple minutes away from 2:30. Does anyone else have another question?
Seeing if my hand showed up. This is Jack. So I wanted to circle back to Fishes and Farmers helping to sponsor this Boots on the Ground today. So thanks for Nancy and Amy. A question I have for the producers, might seem obvious, but we opened up with a fish biologist talking about stream health and the unique trout fishery in the park on the base or the toe of the stream. Do you think the producers on the call, does it help to showcase fish as part of the equation on the work you're doing on the land and how it transfers downstream for water quality? I mean, it might seem obvious, but what do you think of that?
Yeah, I think it would. I think a lot of farmers that's a big hobby of a lot of farmers, and it's a way to connect with them. So I think that is a way to make that connection that, hey, if we have clean water, we'll have good fishing. So
I think so. And also, just even from a recreation perspective on the lakes and, elsewhere, just my kids want to swim, so that's pretty universal, I'd say.
I guess we'll bring this to a close. I thank you. First of all, thank Brad, Melissa, Nick, Ben, Eric, all of you for being with us and taking time to prepare and thoughtfully share your experiences. So remember, when you get stuck, talk to people close to you. people who've been on these calls, we really, you know, over and over it comes up that we need everyone's perspective. So thanks for sharing yours today, and embrace those questions, go after them. Thanks everybody, have a good summer.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thanks, Nancy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy.
Stay safe.